Welcome to DevOps 2.0, the ultimate JS delivery pipeline. This is a recording of a workshop we gave at the 2021 DevOps JS conference. For your convenience, we split the recording into 9 parts. For all relevant links, timestamps, and more information, see the description box below.
Why trunk? Because we have a single main long-running branch, and this branch is considered to be the trunk of our beautiful code tree. Right? We already have this term branches, so why not add another biology-related term to our GitHub terminology? So we have our master branch, our long-running main line of code is the trunk of the project. And then we work on code on feature branches. So this, on the surface, this seems to be very similar to Git flow. But as you can see from this diagram, there are only 2 main types of branches. So we have your master branch and your long-living master branch and your short-lived feature branches. And when I say short-lived, I mean it. Whereas with Git flow, you had short-lived branches that basically lived for as long as you worked on a feature. With trunk development, you create branches for small chunks of each feature. Well, that might be a bit unclear, so let me elaborate on that. Imagine that you're developing a feature or changing your code, and you need to do, let's say, 3 things. So first of all, you need to change something in a form on your website. You need to update a database schema to accommodate that change. And maybe what else could you need? And maybe you change some styling to make this updated form look just right. So if you worked in Git flow, you'd work on these 3 steps on a single feature branch, because as a matter of fact, you're working on a single feature, maybe from a single task that your product owner created for you and defined for you. But in the trunk development model, you'd chop this one feature into 3 smaller chunks. And as soon as you're done working on one of the pieces of that feature, you'd merge it to master. So very small changes integrated extremely quickly, tested extensively, automated tests. So a big part of working in the trunk development model is creating automated tests that make sure that whatever you've written works just fine within the context of the app. The smaller the change, the better. Again, this idea of doing things often, of small chunks, it's a recurring theme, and the trunk development model, it takes it to the next level, so to say. And why would you do that? Well, again, here comes the idea of risk and how much work you're doing within a given period of time and the time between releases. Because not only are you integrating very small chunks of code into your code mainline, you are also releasing your application, your website, whatever, to the public very often. And if you look at this graph, we have risk and we have time between releases, and you can see that the risk gets bigger when you make time between releases longer. And with short periods between releases, the risk is relatively small. So with trunk development, this idea of small chunks, well tested with automated tests, releasing often, this is the way to go. Many people argue that this is what software development projects, what they should do right now. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing, well, there are definitely many things right with that approach, but it's not perfect for everyone. Basically, working in the trunk development model, it implies that you are going to be employing continuous deployment. And this might not be viable for your project if it's not very mature, if you don't have a team big enough or experienced enough, if you have a lot of junior developers working with you, people whom you need to micromanage a bit because they're on the beginning of their journey. So again, keep in mind that this is something maybe to aim for as you're going forward, but this is not something that you should force yourself to implement, for example, after this workshop. So again, gains from developing this model, you quickly deliver new stuff. You probably will have a better relationship with your clients because there's this small feedback loop, and you can often check in what sticks, what doesn't, right? So you'll know if the direction you're heading is the right one, or if you should change it. You probably get better stability. You'll detect bugs quicker since there are so many automated tests running in this model. What it requires from you: discipline, automatization, and something that might be hard to obtain is approval from manager. Management tends to like big releases and frequent deployments and small updates. They tend to look at a bit suspiciously. So yeah, good luck convincing your managers to employ that workflow. But if you can, this could be highly beneficial for your project. Now, how would you set up your pipelines in such a model? Well, let's look at what we have already. You'd really be good to go with two pipelines, with one that tests the changes that are on your branches. So with the pipeline that we set up, that's the feature unit tests on branches. That could be one pipeline that runs on all your branches and runs maybe unit tests, some additional tests that you define, and then a pipeline that tests the app again on the production environment and deploys it to your target infrastructure. So really, two types of pipelines, but they need to have very well-written tests that thoroughly test your app, because remember, as soon as you push and it goes green, it gets to production and there's no turning back. Yeah, so these have been how many? 3, 4 in Git workflows that could be great to implement in your project. Now, from the practical point of view, I think it's worth to have a look at what I call a release on tag workflow, which is, again, it's not something, let's say, standalone. It's not something very different from the workflows I described in the previous section, but it's a workflow that would work great if you're working on something like an npm package, right? That needs to be versioned because your package is used as a dependency in different versions in different projects. So you're creating releases in your repository, tagging, or maybe you are using Docker in your project. You're Dockerizing your application and versioning these Docker images. So how would you handle a workflow when you release a new version to production, when you create a new tag? Well, of course, you could create a pipeline. I could add a new pipeline, just as you saw me do that a couple of times already, and I could walk you step by step. But I'm going to show you a pipeline. In fact, I have created one before we started this workshop, but instead of adding new actions to the pipeline manually, I'm going to use the import pipelines option. And what this allows me to do is it allows me to import a new pipeline described in a YAML config file. I have such a file on my desktop in the pipelines directory. A little bit of a spoiler by the names. You can see that there are two other pipelines that I'm going to import and show you, but first let's focus on this one. As you can see, we have a new pipeline in our repository, which is called release on tag push. Let's dive into it and let's check out what's this pipeline all about. Now, this here pipeline, again, the trigger mode should be familiar to you right now. It's the on push trigger mode. So whenever something gets pushed to the repository, this pipeline will run. But what is it paying attention to? It's paying attention to all tags by wildcard. And what does it mean in practical terms? Whenever a new tag is created in our repository, this pipeline will run. And what are the actions that this pipeline is going to perform? First of all, it's going to build a Docker image with our application. Again, let me stop at Docker for a second. I think that at this point in time, all of us know more or less what Docker is. If there's somebody among us that doesn't know what Docker is, you really should know, because this is the future, or maybe even the reality now of development is very widely used. But in two words, it's a virtualization technology that bakes in the application with its entire environment dependencies into a single file, a single image, and it allows you to run it on any machine without meeting any requirements, recreating an environment for the app to run it. All you need to do is install Docker on a supported machine and then use Docker to run that image, which is in fact the application in a little jar with all of the things that it needs. You just run it with Docker and the app runs beautifully, the same on all machines that run Docker. So basically, just as if you had a console, you just put the disk in and it plays beautifully, whether you have PlayStation 4 or PlayStation 4 Pro, right? So you just insert the disk, you don't worry about anything. So we're doing that with our app, building a Docker image. How to build a Docker image? To build a Docker image for your application, you need to create a Docker file. And if you're wondering, if you haven't noticed that already, we do have a Docker file in our directory. The Docker file defines what's going to be in our Docker image, how it's going to be built. So there's a Docker image on the main level of our repository. So we are building a Docker image with our application using that Docker file. Then with the second action, I'm pushing the image to my Docker Hub image repository. And I'm tagging the image with using an environment variable that's body execution tag. So basically, body is going to read the tag that I created in the repository. It's going to be applied to the execution of this pipeline. And this execution tag is going to also be applied to the Docker image that we built and that we are pushing to the Docker Hub repository. So that's the second action. Now let's return, and there's this final action that what it does is it connects to a server. Yeah, this is yet another server I have set up. It's on external architecture, and the only thing that's fancy about that server is it runs Docker. It has to. If I want to run a Dockerized app, I need the server to have Docker running. So the application connects to the server. It pulls the image from the image repository, and as I mentioned, you can use in your projects, you can use environment variables to store different data. And in this example, the image repository environment variable defines the image repository from which body pulls the image. And also it pulls the image with the execution tag. So that's what I explained a minute ago. It stops the app if it's been running on the server already, and then it runs it using the recently downloaded pulled image. Now, what I've done here additionally to make sure that this imported pipeline works in every case is I've changed the exit code handling to execute all commands regardless of the result of the previous command, because if it didn't run any Docker containers on it before, the Docker stop app command fails because there's no such container. There isn't such a container called app on the server. So this command fails, and the subsequent command won't be executed. So this is the pipeline, and it's very easy to trigger it. I just need to go over to my repository, and if you look to the right-hand side of your view, you should see the releases section. When you click create a new release, you can create a new release and a new tag. These things are on the very basic level, these are interconnected. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a new release called tagged v, let's 665, like not entirely evil. And let's call it my first release. Okay, and now when I publish this release, we should see that our release on tag push pipeline, that it runs. And here what you can see, this is not the tag that I've created. This is v1 is the name of the last commit that's been pushed to the master branch. But here you can see that the tag is present, and the tag is v66. 5. And again, as it is true with all these actions, the first execution might take a while. In my experience, it should be under 2 minutes. But we can check this pipeline in a moment. As you can see, our pipeline has run successfully. So the last action ran successfully, and on this here address, we should have our app running. Okay, hello JS Nation, and as you can see, I'm overusing, as you can see, a bit, right? And we have this same app deployed in 3 different environments. The first one is the server that from our production deployment pipeline. This one is our Dockerized app, and this one is our app running on the staging server created with a body sandbox.